Good morning, everyone. It's great to see everyone so bright and early for the second day. So let's get straight into it. We have a lot of panelists for this session and not a lot of time. So just very briefly for opening remarks. There was a quite provocative opinion piece in an American magazine called Foreign Policy not too long ago after the US decided to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. It was written by a gentleman named Vijaya Ramachandran, Director for Energy and Development at the Breakthrough Institute. And his argument went something along the lines that the Global South should also leave the Paris Agreement for two reasons. The first one was that developed countries were not meeting their end of the bargain. So talking about the new collective quantified goal, which was only reached in 2022 of 100 billion USD. And now with 300 billion, that seems all the more ambitious. And then we add to that the additional 200 billion dollars per year that the developed countries also committed under the Montreal Kunming biodiversity framework. And then the second argument went something along the lines of the high transaction costs that developing countries face in meeting all of these different commitments in different fora across the Paris Agreement and the COPs there, as well as the Kunming Montreal biodiversity framework and the high transaction costs that go into developing the nature biodiversity strategic action plans. So when all said and done, according to this author, climate and by extension nature were just distractions from their main priority, which should be development. Today, I want to make the argument that this zero-sum game is a false logic. In fact, it's exactly the other way around. If we get this right, and I know that's a big if, but if we get this right, nature, climate, and development is a positive-sum game that mutually reinforce each other. And since this relationship is inherently natural, all we need to achieve this is some basic geometry. First of all, I want you to think of a triangle. A triangle with sustainable development at the top and the two points at the base, climate and nature. Now I would like you to think of this triangle not as a two-dimensional shape, as a three-dimensional shape, where we expand the base of the triangle to add private finance and public finance, which creates a square. This square is really the foundation of the pyramid that we're going to try to build today, with the capstone of sustainable development at the top. So to help me build this pyramid, I'd like to invite to the stage Ambassador Lamine Diba, permanent representative of the Gambia's mission to the UN, Secretary Sarhia Moya, National Planning Secretariat of Ecuador, Nicola Picciotino, Secretary General of the International Development Finance Club, and joining us online are Isabel Cabos, Policy Advisor at the European Investment Bank, Mohamed Jilal Musa, the Financial Risk Specialist at the Ministry of Finance and Planning of the Maldives, and Thomas Taylor, Head of Climate Finance at Aviva. Welcome, everybody. So, without further ado, I'd like to begin with Ambassador Diba. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Your Excellency. And the Gambia has an NDC that's widely recognized for its substantial contribution to achieving the global 1.5 degree target under the Paris Agreement. It's also a recognized leader in terms of climate policy and action, with the government having recently developed a resilience-focused national development plan that incorporates the country's biodiversity and ecosystem preservation as a key element of long-term sustained growth that will allow its people to achieve their goals. Recently, the government approved its financing strategy under the INFF, clearly aligning with the aforementioned objectives. Ambassador Diba, could you please share the insights as to how this process unfolded, the approach for implementing these ambitious policies, and the long-term impact you expect from it?
Thank you, moderator. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I just want to begin by thanking the UNDP for convening us here, together with all the other partners who have participated in bringing all of us together for this process that will be subsumed into the FFD process. To begin with, I must also express gratitude to UNDP for the support that they have given to, fortunately, then I was Minister of Environment, for us to review our INDC. That is where the journey started in 2021. And the review of this INDC led to having an NDC that is 1.5 compliant to Paris Agreement. So this is very important for the Gambia as one of the countries that is highly vulnerable to climate and climate-related issues that we are faced with. And to give a brief background as to why are we focusing more on building resilience is because our population is highly vulnerable, their livelihoods are vulnerable, and this is why, as a responsible and responsive government in 2017, we took climate on top of the agenda to integrate climate with the national development agenda. And this integrated national financing framework concept that was developed was based on delivery of the ambitious priorities of the national development priority, that is recovery focus, coming from all the other crises, from COVID-19, from climate crisis, from geopolitical tensions around the world that has really impacted on the economies across the globe, much more of smaller countries like the Gambia. So we have to develop a national development plan that is recovery focused. And of course, that also take into consideration, in local term, we call it YIRIWA, that means development and the sustainable development goals through a coherent and integrated financing process. And this mobilizes all the stakeholders, be private, be public, and even civil society. How do we work together to ensure that we deliver the goods and services that the President of the Gambia has signed the social contract with the people of the Gambia? And there, this mobilizes all the institutional agenda for resource mobilization from domestic, international, public, and the private sector. How do we do this? We were able to assess the landscape of the finances regarding development in general, because the belief we have is that when you address climate, you have to do it holistically to be able to integrate all the development agenda that will spur economic growth and development, hence building the resilience that we want to build in the economy. And when we plug the YIRIWA and the SDG finance gap, that entails significantly increase all sources of sustainable development finance. And the Development Finance Assessment 2024 examines the main flows of the Gambia's financing landscape. And that is these sources from the INFF Resource Mobilization Plan for the implementation of the YIRIWA and beyond. The YIRIWA has a lifespan of 2023 to 2027. But we are looking beyond the YIRIWA because we have the climate policy. We have the long-term vision that looks into zero net zero net by 2050, but also we have a long-term development plan that also look in beyond 2027 to 2050. So these two are interlinked by seeing some of the nexus of climate and development, thus improving the livelihood support system of average Gambians. So the IRWA, the implementation of the IRWA beyond 2027 mutually agreed reform actions plans laid out in our integrated national financing strategy. You are very right that we have just recently approved that. And the INFF can build on the increase of the several financing flows and the solid set of reforms and policy processes that are ongoing in the Gambia. There is significant potential of leveraging additional resources or align available resources more closely to the national development priorities. Just to give you how do we get here? Over the past decade to 2023, there was an overall positive trajectory of domestic revenue, increasing access to ODA, as well as sustained growing inflow of remittances and FDIs, especially since 2017. I'll pause here to explain. Now, prior to 2017, we had a dictatorial government. And coming from dictatorship, for 22 years, a lot of confidence eroded. A lot of investors were not confident enough to come to invest. Even citizens abroad do not have the confidence to put their money in the economy for investment or even putting infrastructure. But with this change of government in 2016, there were a lot of enthusiasm around the donor community, around development partners, investors to come to the Gambia to invest because of the potential that the democracy that we promised the people. So external flows have grown larger than domestic flows. This is quite obvious. When isolating remittances, public resources have grown slower than private finance, but still more than double them, all of them. When we realize this, and we know that we can increase the domestic resources to support the priority areas identified in the previous National Development Plan, we come up with myriads of reforms, legal reforms, institutional reforms, but importantly, our tax system, digitalization of our tax collection system. And this really paid dividend by increasing the revenue by more than 100%. Instead of collecting $500 million every month, our revenue plummeted to $1.2 billion on annual basis, on monthly basis. So we collect almost $20 billion on annual basis. But the fundamental challenge and the issue is this. We try to enhance domestic resource mobilization. With the support of the INFF process, we were able to do this. But the good chunk of this, almost 40 to 45% of this, goes back to service in death. And this leaves us with tight fiscal space for investment in the social sector, much more in the productive base of the economy that can ignite growth and leading to development. This is still a challenge. I was interacting with one of the staff from UNDP. I said, how can we, and the process of INFF and FFD process, be universalized to how can we access private resources in kind of blended financing with the support of UN agencies like UNCDF, UNDP, and other development partners like World Bank and IMF, to see we access these resources, but at the back of it, we have to champion for the reforms, the impending reforms of the IFIs to give more fiscal space to developing countries like the Gambia to be able to invest in these critical sectors of society, social protection, and also ensuring that we have adequate resources to finance our SDG goals. But the SDG goals, yesterday, we were told we are only 17%. How can we get catalytic funding to support these critical areas of the SDG? And if that is what is going to happen, the Summit of the Future has wrapped up some critical areas that need to be looked into the future. The young people. And Africa is one of those continents that has a very young population. My own country has more than 64% of young people below the age of 35. This is a concern that we need to look at. But now, looking at the Gambia's integrated national financing strategy systematically pursue greater coherence and coordination to address the financing bottleneck and policy fragmentation identified through the Gambia's 2024 Development Financing Assessment. Building on this, on an inclusive multi-stakeholder financing dialogue process, the strategy lays out key action steps and reforms to mobilize and align the growing volumes of public and private finance, namely, 1, by mobilizing the full potential of domestic public finance, maximizing the contribution of private finance to green economic and social transformation, and leverage SDG enabling innovative sources of finance, ensure strong linkages of all domestic and external financing sources with real expected results. This I must emphasize, with real expected results. And 4, leveraging commitment of all stakeholders in charge of the mobilization of different sources of finance. And 5, promote more integrated and comprehensive planning and budgeting. This is also very critical to achieving this objective. And 6, support cooperation and coordination among different areas of government. This is very significant, and we believe that this is what led to one of the successes in climate financing, attracting more support from the climate financing. But the climate financing landscape, we still have some gaps. For instance, if you look at our NDC, the NDC is costed almost over 300 million. That's what is needed to do that. But how much do we have? And the NDP is costed at $4 billion. And so far, what we have received from all the sources, from the World Bank and ODA, $137 million. And that is grossly inadequate. So the green economic and social transformation is a pivotal component of our Recovery NDP 2020, signifying a strategic shift towards sustainable economic, social, and environmental development aimed at recovery and poverty reduction. This approach emphasizes the design for socioeconomic policy that aligned with environmental sustainability goals and harness natural assets such as clean air, water, and biodiversity. These are crucial for supporting food production and human health, particularly in rural areas. The government of the Gambia's commitment to environmental protection is evident through our 2021 NDC, transforming our INDC to an NDC that is Paris compliant, and other related legal frameworks which outline our short, medium, and long-term intervention. It also constitutes a critical enabler of growth in financing ecosystem. And one of the key policy actions for the greening of the public finance management, 1, integration of the climate change consideration into Gambia Integrated Financial Management System, IFMIS, And this is a platform where all our transactions through government, and now we're trying to roll this out to subnational level. And this transform IFMIS into climate-focused performance management system to facilitate the planning, budgeting, and reporting of climate financing at sectoral level. Mainstream environmental and climate change concern into Gambia's PFM strategies, sector and regional strategies, and national budgeting process. What we're trying to do, the national climate policy is trying to see how we can trace each of the sectors is contributing to climate change, but how much is government allocating to mitigate or to support those sectors on climate building resilience. And the public investment and low carbon infrastructure is also as part of our mantra to promote climate resilience. Transition urban infrastructure, urban resilience infrastructure. This is towards low emission development pathway and integrating nature-based solutions such as reforestation and green infrastructure, reduce greenhouse gas emission, enhance urban resilience, and provide ecological benefits like increased species diversity. I've already spoken about this.
Ambassador Diba, excuse me, we need to
wrap up. Yes, thank you very much. In wrapping up, and the message that I want to send across is that, yes, it is important, and you, Mr. Chair, you've talked about the NCQU, which I find it very difficult to explain this. You promised to give me $100, and for so many years, you were not able to give me $100. Now you said, new collective quantified goals, you give me $300. How would you be able to mobilize these resources? And now in the definition of the NCQU, what constitutes this is not very clear to us. Whether it is 300 billion up to 2035 or 300 billion on annually up to 2035. So this is the dilemma that we are faced with. And for climate financing, when we have solution to climate, we will be able to address sustainable development goals. So therefore, UNDP and all the other partners, how do we leverage and access private capital to be able to deliver the goods and services to the people, to the vulnerable people? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Diba. Apologies, I left my wallet at the back of the room. But I'm sure the integrated national financing frameworks can help out. I think you've illustrated very well how climate, nature, and correspondingly public and private finance are really creating the foundation for a resilient, sustainable development in the Gambia. Let's turn to Ecuador, because I think they also have a very enlightening story to tell in that regard. Secretary Moya, you've already presented an outline yesterday that was extremely enlightening and informative. But with this emphasis of bringing together climate, biodiversity, and development priorities. I think Ecuador is one of the countries that can really boast about its natural endowment. How do the combined effects of climate, biodiversity, and development enable Ecuador to not only pursue its development plans, but also protect vulnerable populations, and how, as the National Planning Secretariat, are able to harness an integrated financing framework to jointly address the country's specific challenges across these areas in a coherent and holistic approach?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for the opportunity to participate again. I would like to start with the National Development Plan. Ecuador is fully committed with the 2030 agenda, and I want to emphasize that the crucial role that the planning has on this. Last year, we approved the National Development Plan for a year and a half because that's the the framework that we have. Each time that we have a new government, we need to approve a new national development plan. This plan has 107 goals and 72 policies, and it's aligned in a 94.4% to the 2030 agenda, and this is a work that we were able to do through the work that we do with the agencies of the UN. And with this NDP, we created a robust framework for the ministries, and they participated with this work. And as you can see there, there is a specific axis that is called infrastructure, energy, and environment strategic priorities. And this helps us to see where our politics are. And then we were able to participate on the creation of the NDC, and the NDC sets ambitious goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and enhancing resilience, with a strong emphasis on the conservation and sustainable management over forests and other ecosystems. There are 5 prioritized sectors in the National Climate Change Strategy, and 5 in mitigation and 6 in adaptation, as you can see. And you can see there all the NDCs that are part of our NDC. And then how we were able to do this. The National Planning Secretariat leads these efforts and fosters collaboration across the sectors to align our national strategies, including our NDCs, with the SDGs. So what we did is that from the National Secretary of Planning, we called all the ministries that were involved, not their teams, the ministries. We needed the authorities to get involved, to understand the problems that they have because of climate change and because of a lack of climate adaptation. So we needed there the Ministry of Energy, we needed the Ministry of Economy and Finance, we needed there the Ministry of Production, of Agriculture, so they can understand how this is impacting their own work. So as you can see, we have there image of the synergies that you can find when you analyze the Objective 13 climate change. And we use a UNDP tool that is with machine learning that helps you to find the synergies that you have on your planning instruments so that you can better explain to the other authorities their role. So we use this tool, and then we use a workshop with the high authorities so they can map these synergies too. And then we also launch another workshop with the planning teams on each ministry so that they can also understand their role on the NDC. So we did this plan when we were working in another workshop with UNDESA, and we participated in Korea with the Ministry of Environment, so we made this plan, and we've been able to involve first the actors of the government. So with that in mind, we were able to call other actors from the private sector, from the local government, so they can come together and make this NDC more, more integral. And then we've been able also to work on this developing framework with the INFF approach to align financial flows with national priorities, including climate change, mitigation, and adaptation. This INFF process focuses on several key areas. The first one is strengthening the alignment of public finances. We are working to integrate climate and biodiversity considerations into our national budget process, using tools such as a green expenditures classifier and investment labeling. We've also, as a second area, we are trying to mobilize private sector investments and improving access to international climate finance. We are exploring and implementing innovative financing mechanisms to attract private investments and resources, such as social bonds and debt swaps transactions that I talked about yesterday. This has allowed us to canalize debt service to conservation projects, as well as working to create an enabling environment for the private sector engaging. Additionally, we are actively working with international partners to secure financial support from international organizations for climate and biodiversity actions, including the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility. Third, we are improving institutional governance to enhance access to thematic finance, because this is kind of new for our country. And Ecuador has developed several instances of interinstitutional coordination that allows us to integrate the national financing framework. Different committees and boards have been established to coordinate policies, institutional capacities, and financing and investment instruments to achieve the National Climate Agenda and the SDGs. For example, we have the Financing and Thematic Monitoring Institutional Committee, the Sustainable Finance and the Technical Committee for the Coordination of Planning and Public Finance. Some of them involve also the private sector, so I think it's very important in these kind of committees to integrate these other actors that help us to achieve our goals. And fourth, we've developed a monitoring and evaluation framework. We are designing a robust system to track the progress towards our financial goals, but it's not only from the, if you are executing your budget, but it's also the things and the goals that you are achieving in terms of social improvement and for green investments. For example, the measurable indicators align with the Koning-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework that our national biodiversity strategy is in progress of updating. Also this year, the National Planning Secretariat conducted the country's first evaluation with an SDG approach. This was done in the social sector. We see the INFF as a major opportunity to transform our development model and build a more sustainable and resilient future. By integrating climate, nature, and development finance, we can unlock new resources of funding, enhance the efficiency of resource allocation, and create a more coherent way to achieve our national priorities. But for this, as a government, we need to be organized. We need to institutionalize the processes so that we can attract these investors. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Secretary Moya, for really showing us empirically on the ground how countries are bringing together both natural and financial resources to bear on sustainable development. And I have Jilau Musa from the Maldives on the line, I believe. Jilau, are you with us? There we go. Yes. Great. Building on what we heard from Ambassador Diba and Secretary Moya, how does the Maldives experience in establishing a climate-focused financing strategy compare and contrast? Could you walk us through how you were able to build, through the INFF process, a climate-integrated financing strategy in a SIDS that remains vulnerable to climate change and eager to adapt to its effects? We can't hear you. Is there a... We have a technical issue with the mic. You may need to unmute on your end, Mr. Musa. No problem. Well, why don't we, while we get these technical issues resolved, why don't we move to Thomas Taylor, who's also online. Or actually, since we have people here in the room with us, why don't we go to the more immediate solution? Nicola Picciottino, how does the IDFC envision enhancing its role in supporting developing partner countries to effectively leverage public finance, official development assistance, and climate finance strategies to leverage and attract transformative sustainable financing at scale, particularly private capital and investment to create a more impactful synergy in achieving sustainable development, climate, and biodiversity goals?
Thank you very much, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Let me first thanks a lot UNDP for organizing this meeting. I think it's really important to gather all those people, and it's really well timely, and it gives me also the opportunity to thank UNDESA and all the co-facilitators, and namely I see Ambassador Colomer here for the work done on the journey towards FFD4. You have seen that the outcome document was released 3 days ago, and I know how much work it had, and it's I have to say, quite a very good document. So thank you for this, and I hope this meeting will help build on a beautiful event in Seville. But coming back to your question, Chris, first let me explain what IDFC is and how much the public development banks can be as an instrument to foster climate finance and attract better private sector into climate and biodiversity financing. So IDFC is a club of 27 public development banks from all over the world. We have representatives in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia. The characteristic is that we have national development banks, but also regional ones, like BOAD, for instance, in West Africa, but also national, like the development banks of South Africa. This club, the objective of the club is to implement the SDGs by fostering investments through the SDGs. And just to give you one figure on what we do in terms of climate finance, every year we report our financing, and last year we reported 200 billion of climate finance made by all the members. It's an average. In 2022, we provided $288 billion of climate financing, but also biodiversity. Last year, we financed more than $8 billion of biodiversity projects. And IDFC is a club of public development banks, but we have also Finance in Common, the system of the public development bank, gathering the 536 public development banks, and this is something you need to know. There are 155 countries that have a public development banks, and we really think that those public development banks can be part of the solution to foster climate financing. Just to give you some figure about the importance of the public development banks, so 536, I said, representing $23 trillion of assets and 2.5 trillion of financing every year. Imagine if we can green them, all of them, we have won the fight. So just one last thing about the fix for you to have in mind. We are organizing every year a summit gathering all the public development banks. This year, 2025, is going to be in Cape Town in 5 weeks, from the 26th to the 28th of February. And for the first time, we are organizing it together at the same place, at the same moment as the first meeting of the finance ministers of the G20. So it will be a very good occasion to discuss about the importance of the public development banks and maybe reinforce the messages that are already in the outcome documents of FFD4, because we really see the summit as a milestone toward FFD4. We will discuss about the reform of the global architecture, trying to enhance the power of the public development banks, and arrive in Seville, where we will be able to discuss more broadly the framework. And all those two events are really crucial for this 2025 year, because you have all seen that the results of the COP29 in Baku are bittersweet. Of course, we reached an agreement, $300 billion. It's something, it's an agreement, but it's not enough. And you have heard about this roadmap, Baku to Belém, trying to bridge the gap between the 300 billion to the 1.3 trillion we need to reach. And we do think that, of course, public development can be part of the solution. But if we come back to how to attract better private financing into climate and biodiversity. When I was preparing the panel, I thought about maybe four important points. The first thing is really related to what we are discussing today, is having a country-led strategy. That's where INFF are coming. We are also talking about country platforms. There will be an interesting panel at the end of this morning, trying to link INFF and country platforms. But having a country-led strategy, meaning that the country puts on the table the ideas and the sectors they want to foster, is crucial for the private sector. If they have the trust that there is a strategy, it's easier for them to invest. And you have all seen the strategy, the country-led strategy that was released by Brazil just before COP29, this country platform. And for us, this is kind of the future of the architecture we want to have. Why? Because in this country platform, there is the national development banks, BNDES, at the center of it. They did the origination of the project, meaning they are on the ground. They know the specificities of the country and the specificities of the regions they invest in. So they are able to originate projects that are linked to the different strategies made by Brazil. But they are also able to channel the funds, because when you have these country-led strategies, you have the investors coming, being the private sector, but also the philanthropies, and of course the multilateral development banks. And you need to have one recipient, and BNDES can do that, receiving the fund and channeling them towards the right sectors. So first, of course, having a country-led strategy. Second important point is technical assistance. You know, if you have ever invested in climate or in biodiversity, you know how hard it is to find bankable projects. So we need technical assistance. We need technical assistance to foster origination and to help the projects, the project preparation, the project manager, to be able to present bankable projects that could be financed by the public development banks, but also by the other financial institutions. Just for you to know, within the club, within IDFC, we have a technical assistance facility with which we raise money to develop program, and we have one interesting program to foster the financing of sustainable projects into the cities. And so we have consultants for 5 of our members, so directly inserted in the banks, trying to train the people that are working on those topics, trying to improve the procedures. But, and the beauty of this program is also we have consultants directly in the cities, helping the cities to build more bankable projects like this. We can pull our efforts on the demands, but also on the offer, trying to make more climate projects emerge and being financed. We also need, and this is my third point, new financial instruments. It's complicated to finance climate and more complicated to finance biodiversity. That's why we need to be more innovative. And within the financing system, we launched what we call the FIX Innovation Lab, and we are working on 4 topics that are related to climate finance. The first one is CRDC, you know, the climate resilient debt clauses. We have another work stream on debt for nature swap, another one on credits, carbon credits, and the last one on local currency financing, because it's also crucial. If you want to do project on the ground, you need to finance them in local currency. And last but not least, I think it's important also to work on the frameworks, the regulatory framework, the risk framework. Yesterday, one of the panelists said that Africa, from the credit rating agency point of view, is seen as one country. It's crazy. Of course, you have diversity, and it's crazier because Africa is maybe the continent that needs the most the financing to tackle climate change and to help finance biodiversity. So we need to discuss this. We need to engage the regulators. We need to engage the credit rating agencies to better do their job and really assess the risk as they are. So yeah, all those 4 points will be discussed, of course, in Cape Town for the FIX Summit, but also in FFD4. But I think we need to reinforce, and this is my last word, the capabilities of the public development banks, because they know how to finance climate and biodiversity, and they are on the ground, and they are also at the end of the country. So better use the public development banks to put in place those country-led strategies. Thank you.
Well, that was certainly a very broad overview of all of the tools, instruments, resources that public development banks can bring to bear on really the scaling up of finance and the making finance available to countries, to SMEs and private sector working within them. So let me go back to Gilao Musa online then, and how does a country like the Maldives then really try to bring together all these different pieces into a coherent strategy in a SIDS context that remains very vulnerable to climate?
Yeah, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah, firstly, yeah, thanks to Chris and the UNDP and the INFF team for hosting us and giving us a platform to share our views, and of course the numerous and long history of technical assistance and financial assistance provided to the Maldives. So let me begin with some context as to why we required an INFF. So similar to our colleagues from the Gambia, Maldives is also facing multiple climate vulnerabilities, including rising sea levels, coastal erosion, coral reef degradation. I mean, we face all kinds of issues, and these issues are directly linked to our livelihoods. The Maldives is in a bit of a unique situation where we are an upper middle income country, but we are essentially treated as highly risky in terms of investment risk because of our climate risks. And a lot of it is because climate change is directly linked to our livelihoods in tourism and fisheries, especially, which make up more than 50% of our economy. So it is in our direct interest to proactively seek feasible solutions and financing to address these challenges. And this is also in line with some of our commitments on the international stage, including our NDC of achieving net zero by 2030, which is conditional on external support. and also our new renewable energy target of achieving 33% by 2028. And we recognize that, well, yeah, let me put it this way. The IFC estimates that we require to $1.5 billion a year to combat climate change, or spend to mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change. And that would be more than half of our national budget, annual budget. So we simply do not have the funds to, in our public space, to do this alone, so to speak, through our public sector. So we needed a broad strategy to uh, to both utilize our existing sources of finance and reach new sources of finance to effectively address all of our challenges. So I'll just go through the process that we went through to publish the INFF climate financing strategy that we have. So we started with a high-level steering committee that was led by the Minister of Finance. So it was very important that we get the clearance from the very top level and support from multiple government agencies, as pretty much every area of government is linked to in some way to climate change. So be it education, health, I mean, all of these sectors face different risks from climate change. So we had a very broad representation on our steering committee, and with assistance from UNDP, of course, and other UN agencies, we decided to focus our financing strategy on climate change, but we added another component specifically on gender. So we wanted to make a gender responsive climate financing strategy, which is the reason for that is we believe that climate change disproportionately affects uh, more vulnerable segments of society, including women and children. So we explicitly laid that out in our title as well, to emphasize that we want to focus on we want to have a focus on gender responsivity as well. And so we led the process, as in the Ministry of Finance led this process, and we first held an intensive diagnostic workshop, actually multiple workshops with local agencies, local government agencies, private sector representatives from banks, from SMEs, from all over, and also with MDBs and other development partners, and to identify the challenges and opportunities. So we worked on the development finance assessment with UNDP, and also to inform the basic requirements for the climate financing strategy. And we focused our priorities, or we prioritized three main pillars, so to speak, in this discussion. So we narrowed it down to these three issues, or policy priorities that we want to work towards. So the first one is the transition away from fossil fuel towards renewable energy. For us, that would be the single biggest savings that we can achieve, especially given that we are a completely we do not produce any oil, and we have to import all of our energy requirement except for the renewable energy component. And we recognize on the global stage our target of reaching net zero emissions and 33% by renewable energy might not have that much of an impact globally, but we embrace our role as a champion of fighting against climate change, and we want to lead by example. And so that's the first pillar that we wanted to work on. So to move away from fossil fuels, to transition to renewable energy, we need to reduce our subsidies given to the to bring in oil, we need to establish the mechanisms in place to support the renewable energy transition. We need to build grid networks, battery storage capacity. So we firstly listed out all of the actions that's required to support the transition to renewable energy. Then the second pillar that we identified was the management of climate risks. So this is quite broad, but includes things like how climate change affects our fiscal balances, our I mean, it goes beyond only the government, but I mean, things like climate risk insurance and how we can utilize our carbon emissions through developing carbon emission trading systems and such. And the third area that we focused on was to mobilize sustainable financing. So, as Ambassador Diba mentioned, we have been promised a lot of money, but we have not been able to receive much of it yet. So, we no- more than just relying on external sources, we want to redirect our existing sources of finance in a sustainable manner uh, to reduce the burden of seeking external financing at high interest rates, for example. So those are the three pillars that we focused our strategy on, and we came up with a list of 16 financing objectives and over 100 specific actions. So each of these actions are assigned to a specific agency and an estimated timeline. And we've listed all of this and we published this. And we ensured that at least one gender responsive action is included in each of these 16 objectives. And we, together with this strategy, we also worked out on a monitoring evaluation framework. And I believe the first monitoring evaluation report will come out this year on the INFF, on the Maldives INFF, together with the UNDP's assistance. And we established the Maldives Climate Finance Hub as a within the Ministry of Finance to facilitate the governance and implementation of the actions within the INFF. And we held a final round of very intensive validation workshops to ensure that all of the actions were in line with the government's priorities and also addresses the private sector's concerns. And
Mr. Musa, I'm going to have
we
to
focused.
stop. We need
Yeah.
to. We have two more panelists that we want to get to.
Okay.
Maybe just to wrap up very briefly.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to to bring up one point before I wrap up, which is that in terms of reflections from our process of developing the INFF, I think it would be very beneficial to for SIDS especially to link it with the current global macroeconomic situation. So we are dealing with a lot of a lot of SIDS and developing countries are dealing with unsustainable debt levels and escalating inflation, and we have a lot of things to address on our mind. And it's difficult to focus on some of the longer term climate goals that we have while we have to deal with these budgetary issues as well. So to focus the actions in a way that links with fiscal and debt sustainability would be I think the most ideal way forward. Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, that summarizes it very nicely. So without further ado, let's move to Tom Taylor, Head of Climate Finance at Aviva, who is also joining us online and who can give us some insights to how insurance companies and savings provide investment opportunities for climate action. Mr. Taylor, could you walk us through specifically what strategies and initiatives you're already implementing or planning to implement that leverage the unique position of the insurance and savings sector to mitigate climate risks?
Yeah, thank you, and yeah, Excellencies, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here and to have heard those insightful comments from my fellow panelists. I wanted to touch slightly on the role of the private sector in this debate. So I work in the investment management arm of the Aviva business, which means we're supporting long-term pensions and insurance business of the wider Aviva group. And thinking about what we have heard from fellow panelists and what you've been discussing over the last 24 hours, I think it's really important that although we as a responsible investor are integrating consideration of the risks associated with all of the sustainable development goal issues, but particularly and probably most advanced on risks and opportunities connected to climate change and nature loss, but nonetheless also looking at across the whole of the SDGs. I think it's really important that, yes, of course, we need to consider those risks where there are challenges that can threaten long-term economic growth and sustainable development, and the impact that those have on markets and returns, and equally the role both to protect the savings and investments of our clients, but also the role that their capital can have in transforming the sustainable development space. But it's also really important to recognize that we are dependent, as we all are, on a functioning global market and economy for our business, and that we need a sustainable economy in all senses of the word. So we need economies that can deliver growth that can be sustained over time, and that can help with economic development, that can help with the alleviation of poverty, that can help with delivery of the SDGs, help with that fiscal and debt sustainability space that we just heard about, but also that we need a sustainable economic system in the sense of ecological and social development. Because if we don't, if we're prioritizing short-term profit over long-term sustainability, and going all the way back to the Brundtland report, which we never have succeeded in achieving a situation where we're meeting the needs of today without compromising the ability of those in the future to do that, then that is building up risk in the system that is it is one of the key concerns for the private sector financial institutions to manage. And we can't just say that we will integrate and take account of those risks. We need to also address the sources of those risks and make sure that we deal with those fundamental problems that are causing those risks to be incubated and increased in the market. Because we need the global economy, we need financial markets. We've heard about the importance from my fellow panelists of not just public finance, but private finance, and not just domestic resource mobilization, but external financing in delivering the sustainability goals and delivering the ambitions of INFFs that countries have. But at the moment, the way that the global economy is set up and has been for a long time, the way that the incentives work in the system promote short-term profit making, promotes money flowing to high emission, nature depleting, inequality perpetuating economic activity, as opposed to promoting sustainability in both those senses of the word. So what we need to do, as well as taking those prudent steps to integrate risks, is we need, as a financial institution, to be using our influence with our peers, but also with regulators and policymakers, to say we need fundamental changes to align the global economy with the goals that you've set in the 2030 agenda. We need economic incentives to align with the Sustainable Development Goals, with the goals of the Paris Agreement, with the goals of the coming Montreal framework on biodiversity. And until we get that consistency, unfortunately, money is only going to flow in a marginal sense. We're not going to see the huge amounts of money that we know reflect the needs flowing to the places that they are needed. And there isn't a lack of money in the financial system. We're talking about 1 to 2% of global GDP. And if, even though those numbers seem, as we heard, for example, from the ambassador from the Gambia, talking about the difference between 100 billion, 300 billion, and even the 1.3 trillion stretch goal in the Baku to Belém roadmap, they seem huge and unattainable amounts of money. But when you're talking about 110 trillion of global GDP a year, you have to wonder, where is the other 99% of global GDP flowing? And that's why we need that role, that advocacy from all corners, including the financial sector, on behalf of our savers, on behalf of our insurance clients, on behalf of the system as a whole. We need that advocacy for public policy change, as well as responsibility from us, because there's this shared responsibility for the global system. We have a role in managing the system, but because we're dependent on the system, because we have a responsibility to our clients, and we have a wider social and moral responsibility as actors to use our voice to call for the alignment of systemic incentives. And this is why it's so good to hear all the panelists talk about the importance of a holistic and integrated approach, which is what we see in the INFF frameworks. It's one of the things we've used as an example, as we've called for things like not only transition plans from the private sector, but national transition plans to back up NDCs and NDSAPs and SDG frameworks, so that we can see the planning and the long-term strategic ambition of countries that can be backed up by finance. Thinking about the terms of this panel, climate and nature, we know those impacts that we're increasingly seeing have the ability to stop development in its tracks. But the converse is also true. I believe that taking a positive approach to the transition and seeking investment in the transition in climate, nature, and sustainability is the route to sustainable long-term economic growth that can help deliver both those economic and sustainable goals, and also will drive the demand. All of you, I know, will have heard so many times from the private sector the need for bankable projects, the need for de-risking, but actually delivering on the energy transition, on the social transition, on the nature transition is where the demand for the projects that private finance can and will invest in comes. But that's dependent on also shifting the economic incentives. And that's why we use our voice, why we advocate with policymakers and regulators, because we believe that's the only way we will have a long-term sustainable system. Thank you.
Excellent, because I actually wanted to stop you right there because we have Isabel Cabos from the European Investment Bank on the line as well, precisely to talk about that policy framework and the incentives that a public development bank like the EIB can help shape in order to achieve those goals between climate development and nature. So Isabel Cabos, thank you very much for joining us this morning from Luxembourg. You've heard our panelists from 3 countries, our colleague from the IDFC, Thomas Taylor from the private sector, and his concerns regarding de-risking. What's the EIB doing to deploy public resources to scale up green investments for a resilient future, particularly through its approach to risk, and how does this fit within the broader landscape of sustainable development, notably partnerships between the public and private sector?
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. And thank you, UNDP, for the invitation. Do you hear me well? Is it all clear?
Loud and clear.
Yes, good. Thank you very much. So good morning to all of you, dear panelists and colleagues and esteemed participants. It's a real pleasure to be speaking to you today. And indeed, the nexus is complex: climate, biodiversity, development financing, and all that within the framework of the integrated national financing framework. So I think one thing we've said today is that the science is clear. We are damaging an ecosystem. Over half of the global GDP, which means 55%, depends on nature. And yet we invest too much in harming nature and too little in protecting it. So too often we underestimate the risk that are involved in these losses, and we fail to adequately prepare when making investments, and making investments is even more difficult. So just let me recall that the EIB is the European Union financial arm, and that our shareholders are the EU member states. And we have a balance sheet of 600 billion euro, and we are amongst the largest MDBs, multilateral development banks in the world. So we do recognize that intersection of financial stability, environmental sustainability. We really have committed to align to Paris Agreement, gradually to coming Montreal Global Biodiversity frameworks. And as Tom just shared, we use our influence to increase nature positive investments. So we act in 4 ways. We build partnerships with UN partners, development banks, companies, and nature organizations or civil society. So that the purpose behind is to help reduce risks, prepare projects, and scale solutions. The second thing we work on is to promote generative practices in farming, forestry, and fishing, protecting biodiversity through sustainable method. And that is very linked to another aspect we have, which is to include nature in all decisions. Every policy and investments must consider its impact on nature, and we stop financing of harmful activities. And we set standards and we track progress. We need clear principles. It's a bit like for all the reporting that has been developed for climate issues, we absolutely have to raise that level of understanding for nature positive financing. Companies and financial institutions should disclose how they affect and depend on nature. I think in Europe, the context is very peculiar because we have the CSRDs, so different directives that are supporting this reporting. We encourage it, and this is really important to see how that can be made elsewhere. So let me share now how we innovate to address the dual challenge of unsustainable debt burden, and really that urgent need for nature and climate action in vulnerable countries. We have discussed yesterday that many developing countries face high level of external debt, leaving little fiscal space to invest in nature, climate resilience, and mitigation efforts. So we have worked on debt for climate, debt for nature swap to allow countries to free up financial resources by converting their debt obligation into funds for sustainable development, reducing financial pressure while prioritizing nature and climate goals. And this is a model for vulnerable states. It shows how innovation and global partnerships can deliver environmental, social, and economic benefits. It has been pioneered by Barbados, and it was a debt for climate swap. So here is how it works. Barbados to replace an expensive debt with more affordable financing supported by guarantees from the Inter-American Development Bank and the EIB. And this swaps has generated around $125 million in fiscal savings. And these savings will fund critical resilience projects to improve water management, protect marine ecosystems, and safeguard public health. And the focus there is on upgrading the South Coastal Sewage Treatment Plant into a water reclamation facility, which is the first of its kind in the Caribbean. So that facility will produce water for agriculture irrigation and groundwater recharge. So the deal is structured as a sustainability-linked loan. What it means is that if Barbados doesn't meet water reclamation targets, it will have to pay a financial penalty into a sustainability fund. So this ensures accountability. And the partners like the Green Climate Fund or the CIBC Caribbean have made this project possible. In particular, the Green Climate Fund, they played a pivotal role. They provided 4 million grants as part of the financing package. And just before we were discussing, I think it's a representative from SAIDS that mentioned the importance of all project preparation and technical assistance, fully aligned on that, and this is exactly what GCF can deliver. So I shared what we build, that we build partnerships and that we set progress to track progress, and we do that with other MDBs, and we are stepping up together to actually also see what are the principles that can be that can be launched. And we at EIB, we have proposed to track nature positive finance to help measure impact and guide investors. And we use also a biodiversity risk score to do that. And it's really based on a couple of key metrics. We identify what are the high impact nature sectors within our loan portfolio to enable targeted strategies and better management of investments results. And we pinpoint geographic hotspot, rich in natural assets or biodiversity that have to be taken into account during the investment.
Isabel,
We also,
unfortunately, we're running out of time on this panel.
absolutely, fully understand.
Could we maybe 30 seconds to final thoughts on?
Absolutely, my apologies, Chris, no problem at all. So just the last thing we do is that we align our risk assessment and process with the guidance of ECB, for example. What I want to share is that there are other projects that we can refer to. For example, in Morocco, we financed 100 million to restore 600,000 hectares of forest. In Ivory Coast, we've been supporting sustainable cocoa farming to preserve forestry. And we also are a partner of the Clean Ocean Initiative, which mobilized 4 billion to fight plastic waste. So I think, yeah, nature positive investments, they will just strengthen our planet and economy. And we just look forward to be there with you on this kind of investment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isabel. So just to briefly wrap up, I think drawing on the evidence that we heard from our country representatives and panelists, having heard both the public and the private perspective, as we march towards Seville and the Financing for Development Conference, the key takeaway that I'd appreciate everyone here in this room to take forward is that climate, nature, and development really constitute a triumvirate. And this triumvirate needs to be squared with the realities of finance on both the public and the private side. And if we do this correctly, then we will achieve collectively our sustainable development goals. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, panelists. That was a fantastic discussion. We're going to move from how do we make economies sustainable in all senses of the word to how do we make financing work for gender equal economies. We'll take a slightly shortened 15-minute coffee break before we come back to the next session. Thank you.